Well, I'm down here. It's a Saturday. It feels like a Sunday because I had such a weird end to my work week. And I figure I'm at very least going to fire this thing up, take it around the block, I guess, once. And then I'm going to start probing some of the wiring in this and get a diagram going to make it a little bit easier to replace the terrible fuse box and kind of cut out some of the old wiring, or at least cut it down to length, and in a lot of cases probably remove some of it and replace it with different color wires just to make future troubleshooting a little bit easier. But yeah, first things first, I'm going to go ahead and remove the battery maintainer. Get that bad boy probably just put in the trunk for safekeeping and make sure nothing else is in the way. And then we'll old start this bad boy. I don't think this has run since the fall, so I assume it'll fire right up like it always does, but let's see. You never know. Could throw a rod or something. I don't know. All right, charger disconnected. Come up here. I don't think I have anything hooked up here, but just for the record, what we're talking about is all this up here. I did label it at the time, but I'm not sure if that Sharpie is any good anymore. I should be able to trace at least some of this. I know there's for sure both banks of injectors are fused up here. I believe the fuel pump is fused up here. Beyond that, I don't really remember. Probably something to the actual ignition driver as well. But anyway, we'll get this into the better lit part of the garage. Let's actually latch that down since I will be taking this for a very brief drive. And yeah, let's see if she fires up, eh? Uncut, dramatic, reality. All right, and neutral. I built this thing. It just doesn't make any sense. It's perfect. All right, let me get the garage door opened up and take it outside. It just doesn't make any sense. It's so good. It's so good. All right, sorry, I have to multitask out of that app to close the garage door. But yeah, some of that wiring I would really love to clean up. And it's still very, very cold. It was much nicer last week, but you can see blowing flurries. Luckily, there's no road salt down here, so I'm not super worried about taking it around the building. But everything seems okay. Just want to put a couple 100 feet on it, and then we're just going to pull it right back into the lift bay, just so we have a little bit better access to the wiring. But yeah, in fact, I might even back it in, because most of the things we're working on are going to be on the passenger side. Oh. The no power steering thing is sure fun. It has been tempting to put electric power steering into this thing. Oop. Whee! Yeah, man, she drifts. But I don't know. Just getting it solid, getting a charging system back into it would be really, really nice. Oh, wow. Yeah, these summer tires are very summery-y. Like I said, everything works electronically other than the throttle position sensor being a little bit wonky. So we'll look into that. Yeah, everything seems okay. Pretty happy with that. Well, I've dug into it, and I can say a couple things for sure. One, nothing to do with the electric fan and the fogs happens over here. This is all engine management. And just for my own sanity, I will have to do another diagram and clean it up, but right now this is kind of where I'm at. So there's a bunch of stuff that comes off the Mega Squirt that I don't think I necessarily have to deal with. All of that on the engine harness seems like it's pretty okay, so there's going to be a lot over here. But I have traced the main relay and the fuel pump relay, and then the underhood fuse box, which is most of what I am planning to replace. And then I also have this E39 BMW master fuse block here, and I'm actually really happy to see this. I have a 200 amp fuse in there, and I was a little worried because under the hood right now, the big wire just kind of, that goes to the alternator. It's a little worrying because it kind of was rubbing on the exhaust manifold for a while, but it does have a 200 amp fuse, so that will actually pop if there's a problem. So past me had a little bit of fire prevention within him, and then I'm using, it looks like, one of the 30 amp outputs as well for my main relay. So on top of that, there's really not much going on, and it looks like I have a lot of double fuse action going on everywhere, which is fine. Everything seems like it's working. But yeah, I've got the main bundle of engine harness wires. They come in right there, which is actually kind of tidy. And then I've got, of course, the standard loomed mega squirt to the micro squirt V2 over here. And then everything else is kind of just nasty where it's spliced together. Everything's uneven lengths. Looks like the connector for the, what do you call this again? The MAP sensor, manifold absolute pressure sensor, that actually popped out while I was working with this. The ground point is dubious at best. So a lot of the junction I want to fix and kind of tidy everything up to a correct length. Probably cut a lot of length out of the Mega Squirt harness. As far as this main fuse block, I think I'm actually going to keep it. I'm just going to riv nut it under the dash so it's actually out of the way, because I do like having that additional layer of fuse protection, but I have been labeling a lot of the wires as they go under the hood. The injectors are probably the biggest culprit, where they get 12 volts. I thought they went straight through the 7.5 out of the relay. Nope, they loop under the hood into two more 7.5s and then back to the injectors. So that just isn't necessary, and that's all super thick gauge wire too. So anyway, a lot of that needs to be dealt with. But yeah, I'm gonna take the new one out of the box and see exactly how many ins and outs we have and start mapping that. And since these videos are arguably more for me than they are for you, these two up here, so the one red wire that's actually in this split wrap and the other small one here, these go up into the loom, and one of them should be a ground trigger for the relay for the fan, and the other one should be a ground trigger relay for the fog lights. Those should be going, these relays, excuse me, should be going to ignition switch power, but they're not, so I may address that. But right now I pulled all that out of the dash over there, and it looks like I tried to get the lighted switches lighted, which I'm not going to be doing because that never worked. But I think I have enough info over there now to populate the new diagram and therefore the new fuse box. And I think we're gonna have main relay, fuel pump relay, fan relay, fog light relay, and then probably just a spare that is ignition switched as well. So I'm not sure what we'll use that for, but it's probably going to be handy. Then we'll still have a sixth that's just completely to spare. And then I'll have to populate out, excuse me, what these will be. We only have 6 fuses to work with, but I think that's still enough. All right, well, I think I've figured this out. First things first, I wrote down the relay config I'm planning on using, and the Bosch part number is right there. I did flip it because I do like knowing what I'm looking at with the relay actually in the socket. So effectively we're looking at it on this side. But yeah, here's a diagram of the fuse block. It's a little bit hard to see where the outside lines start and end, but I've got my main E39 fuse block right here. I'm going to use the 200 amps still for the starter and the alternator. I don't know the size of these sub fuses. I think they're 30 to 50, 60 amps, something like that. So I'm gonna use one for the injectors, one for the main, and one for the fan. So that should spread out the load enough where I'm not really worried about it. We're gonna run a 40 amp main relay in this socket right here, top right. That's going to feed off power to pretty much all the fuses in here. And then a lot of that's gonna feed into the actual relay input, which is blade number 30. And then we're going to use various ground triggers and positive triggers through the coil, which are 85 and 86. Luckily, it doesn't even matter if we flip it because the coil is agnostic. You can put ground on one side and positive on the other. Doesn't really matter. It's just a solenoid or a coil. I don't think we're going to be using the normally closed position on any of these relays, but I believe these are the 30 amps are 5-pin, so we do have that option as well for the normally closed and normally open as well. So anyway, I think that should cover everything. I do have the fan and the fogs in here as well, running through 2 relays down there, running through fuses which come through the main. So I'm reasonably confident that we should be in good shape there. I do need to make sure that I've got suitable wire, and then this block itself, the back is open and there's no like common bus bar, unfortunately. I kind of wish there was. So the plan, I think, is just to have this parallel to the ground just like you see it here, but I'm gonna have to build out some metal brackets, probably with aluminum, and then nutsert that into the firewall just so this hovers. So the bottom will be open, but I don't really want to cut a huge hole into the car for that. So there's definitely going to be some spaghetti, and the biggest thing I think is going to be running the output from the main relay over to everything else that needs it. So like the fuel pump relay, we have to power the inside of the coil, and we need to power the input of the relay as well. So it's a little bit messy. We're going to have, I think, 5, 6 connections potentially, but we should be able to daisy chain off of it. So I'm really hopeful that I can get all of those into one of these output connector pins. If not, we could consider changing this up and running 2 main relays. It's a little bit unconventional, but it is definitely something we could look at. So anyway, this is my plan for what to do with our fuse and relay box here. Implementing that in the cleanest way possible is a little bit dicey, but I think we should be okay as long as I'm methodical about it. So this is definitely what the car needs. This is, again, what I observed in the car, not counting any of the engine computer stuff. So I don't know, didn't come with a whole lot of instruction, which is fine, but hey man, I don't know. Only way to get it done is to get it done, and I need that electric fan working. So after we get all this done, tidied up, then I can finally go back to building an idler to keep the alternator belts on. All right, well, we got to start. I do need to wait, though, and order some 16 and 18 gauge primary wire, because I do have 18, but it's only black, and I'm going to need it for the positive side. But I do at least have the main wired into this side of the fuses, leaving the top one open for, looks like we're going to be running that straight into the battery panel for the fuel pump relay. So I have a few reasons why I need to just hang on and get some smaller wire. The 12 gauge stuff is great, but it's really hard to work with. I'm actually pretty proud of how tight I got these down in here, but I couldn't run the grommets at all on the fuse side here. So again, for a car that gets driven as little as it will, I'm not so worried, but still labeling everything as I go. And I was working on the roof, but I stopped doing that because I don't really want to gouge the hell out of it. I haven't disconnected anything yet. I don't want to make this car unable to move while I'm working, but I did notice one crazy thing while I was in here. The idle control valve is completely disconnected, so car runs really well. I'm not exactly sure. I do plan to hook that back up, but other than that, everything else was okay. I do intend to look at the TPS a little bit more closely on the engine side once we finally get into it as well. Make sure there's no corrosion there. But anyway, we'll soon be able to bypass a lot of that, a lot of unnecessary wire length, and completely get rid of this block up here, which doesn't do a bloomin' thing anyway. So I feel, like I said, a lot better about this wire right here being fused, because right now that just goes down to the starter and there's really no protection on it at all. So if that were to ground out, it would just pop the mega fuse and I would just have to have it towed. So not a big deal. Most of this is going to remain as it is for the ignition system. I'll probably riv nut a better ground in here for the ignition and for the relays up here. Actually, no, I'll be ditching the relays up here entirely. Never mind, I forgot about that. Those will be directly controlled via the block up here, which will be superb. And now that I'm thinking about that, means I will definitely be needing some more 12 gauge primary wire for the fan. Damn, I'm running low. Anyway, thinking out loud, not a big deal, but this side, that's my plan. Over here, as you guys know, I do need to bolt that back in for sure. This thing keeps chucking belts, so my plan is to build an idler for here-ish, 3D printing it at first and then getting it CNC'd, because no matter what I do, I just cannot seem to keep an alternator belt on this. And then over here, from long time ago, the brake booster setup, the 540 setup, it's braced fairly well down here to the actual, I'll call it a frame rail, even though it's a unibody, so it isn't. But I would like to add a secondary brace. This one up here is welded to just non-structural garbage, and that bothers me now. So I'm going to go ahead and riv nut some more into some structural areas of the car and get rid of that entirely, because it's just kind of icky. So anyway, this car deserves a little more of a look these days. I am also planning to bring the hood up to a friend up north here, and I'm going to get it louvered on both sides to help the cooling situation. It does okay, but on really hot days in traffic, it's not great. So I'd really like to have a little bit more flexibility with this thing when I'm out and about. If I get stuck in traffic, don't lose my mind trying to make sure this thing doesn't overheat. So anyway, that's the plan. But yeah, since I actually have parts to work on Blubzki's getting worked on first. Imagine that. All right, just a brief update the next day. I did track down a few more spools of wire. Unfortunately, not very many colors. So I'll try to get a little bit more of that going, but I have most of this built out, I think. There's a spare fuse right here, which I don't think I'm gonna end up populating with anything just yet. I'll probably put the grommet in there just so I don't lose it, but everything else I think is pretty solid. So we got fuel pump power in from the Mega into the fuel pump relay, and we got that massively overpowered on the trigger side here with the 12 gauge coming off the main relay into the fuses. We're going to have a fuel pump output on the top there, and trigger in from the Mega Squirt over here. Over here, we're going to have a 12-volt ignition in from the car. That wire already exists, so I don't want to splice. Just going to shove it right in when we're actually installed. And then the top of this relay here is going to be the output to both banks of our injectors for power. Other than that, everything else is labeled. We have spools of red and white down here. These are kind of crappy CCA, just trying to use it up. But these are for the dash switches for the fogs and the fan. And then we have outputs for the actual fan power. Input for the fan power, I believe that comes from the Mega as well. And everything else I think is just daisy chained off of the input here. I tried to keep all the electrical load that's coming in off of this main relay a little bit more reasonable, and shifting that load off to the other relays as well. So anyway, we're closer. I'm maybe going to size up the actual bracket for the firewall to hold this thing later today. We'll see how ambitious I get. It was up kind of late last night, so we'll see. Like I said, right now everything runs and drives just fine on this car, so I'm not going to take it apart to install this until it is for sure time. But yeah, that's where we sit on this block right here. You can see we're pretty well populated on the top. It looks pretty official. I'm not going to be using these power relay, but I did have a few of these around just to make sure everything fits, and it looks like we're in really good shape. So anyway, I'm gonna put away my soldering iron now. Did end up tinning a few ends of these after crimping them just to make sure that they're not gonna go anywhere. They can handle current very well. See you guys soon. Well, this is going to be our location. The tabs seem to line up just fine. I did trim back a little bit of the insulation and put in some M5 riv nuts. But before I can really get into that, I do have to remove this old fuse box, trace where everything goes, and then make sure I get all of these connections terminated correctly into the new fuse block, which shouldn't take too much effort. It looks like mainly I need ignition switch power coming in, as we mentioned before, fuel pump out, fuel pump trigger in, and injector out. So really not a big deal. Looks like everything should be pretty close. I know the injectors and the fuel pump are up here already. Ignition switched, I believe, does come up here, but again, I'm gonna cut out some unnecessary wire in the process, so hopefully tidy it up just a little bit. Well, I am soldering a little bit onto these just because fuel injectors are pretty critical and it's tight in here. So that's the output 12 volt for the switched fuel injector stuff. I'm in it now, so I'm gonna go ahead and do the other The wires, the really thick red one down here is the fuel pump output. We're gonna be shoving that in the grommet there. Then I have to go back into the car and look for the ignition switch to 12 volt. And I'm hopeful that we're gonna be in good shape once I get that stuff all hooked up and we get the master main power hooked into the car as well. Well, here's what the inside's looking like. I haven't cut almost anything out yet except for the 2 relays. I still need to go through and look at a lot of this and pare it down. But after that, this is kind of the length of the wiring I'm looking for from the Mega Squirt up to the fuse box here, these 2. So I'd really like to actually cut down the majority of these. So I'm probably gonna buy a bunch of those heat shrink solder butt connector things and just do it up as best I can. It's really not ideal to splice every one of those, but they're already spliced. So whatever, we'll get it done. Maybe I'll try to stagger them, make it look decent. The plug I'm noticing from my map sensor is still like barely hooked in. Not really very confident about that. So more things we have to look at for sure. But yeah, man, this is the first pile of wire that we've ripped out. So definitely no turning back now. Everything's mounted up there. I have a new ground point here. And I'm gonna load this up with a few relays just to start the main and the fuel pump and a couple of fuses. And I'm gonna start testing for continuity just to see if any of this is working. Okay. Oh, that's good. I hear fuel pump and that means the main's working, it means the fuel pump's working. Let's check the other little guys. Yep. Okay, so even though those relays look terrible, apparently they're working just fine. So let me clear this crap off the engine. Let's try starting it just to see if all the injector power and everything's working. Nope, so we have an issue somewhere. Well, I pulled that injector lead off. I'm like, no power. And I came back, injectors. I'm short a relay, so I hadn't even tried that one. I threw a relay in there, and immediately we've got juice. So let's try again. Still no dice. Interesting. Another throwback. I forgot that I had a switch in there for ignition cut, kind of as an immobilizer, but also mainly for when we flood it. Interesting. Okay. Well, I need to hook this up to switched 12 volt now. Oh, God. I'll have to think of which relay is going to be easiest to cram this into as well. But yeah, we're going to need voltage to the coil for sure. So let me hook this in crudely and let's see if it starts. I think she might be flooded. Yes, she was flooded. Well, it runs with all that bypassed, so that's a great start. Still have a lot to work on over here, but that's great. Even the speedo came up just fine, so excellent. We have a lot to do, and now I've got to find actually, I think I have the spare relay, which we can use for ignition, so we'll figure that one out.